Thank you all for coming, and welcome to the 32nd Annual Letelier-Moffitt Human Rights Awards. I'm John Cavanagh, and I'm the Director of the Institute for Policy Studies, and I'll be your guide to this evening's festivities. Now, I know that many of you are feeling fear and anxiety and anger about both the elections and the financial crisis. We are in the midst of a moment that bears some similarities to what the Reverend Jesse Jackson described poetically in the 1980s. And I just noticed Bob Borisaj come in, he probably wrote this, which is, as corporations merged, CEO salaries surged, workers got purged, and the economy was submerged. Well, what I want to say to you tonight is that this is what it feels like in the middle of a paradigm shift. You're in one, and it represents an enormous opportunity if only we have the smarts and the guts to seize it. What was the old paradigm? Our good friend Naomi Klein has called it the Shock Doctrine, and in her best-selling book, she cites none other than Orlando Letelier, who wrote a path-breaking article in The Nation magazine 32 years ago, describing the horrors of free market policies on the working people of his native Chile, and how those policies necessitated military repression to pacify resistance by those who were hurt or marginalized. Of course, that was just the beginning of the Shock Doctrine. Most countries on the planet, including our own, have had 3 decades of reckless deregulation and privatization that has unleashed the titans of Wall Street to take your hard-earned savings and pour them into a vast, deregulated global financial casino. Well, in the last 3 weeks, that casino and that paradigm have come crashing down. The Wall Street titans who did everything to chase the feds off Wall Street are leading the charge to bring them back. We are witness daily to problems that the market can't just solve. And we are watching governments and citizens' movements reassert their power. What will we replace the old paradigm with? Well, how about a shock doctrine of our own? How about a progressive shock doctrine? How about a doctrine that shocks the market fundamentalists by transforming our country and the world from one where corporate profits rule to one where the needs of the people and the planet come first? How about one that shocks the Henry Kissingers of the world by transforming our foreign policy from reckless unilateralism and vengeance to international law and justice? How about a doctrine that shocks Halliburton and Lockheed and the other defense contractors by slashing our military budget and spending it on human needs? And how about a doctrine that shocks those Wall Street titans by making them pay for their own bailout? We can do these things and more, but we can only do them if we work together in the new networks and new coalitions, some of which have sprouted up in just the past 3 weeks. Now, many of you here have already been killing yourselves, working to bring real change to this country on November 4th. We all know that if these efforts succeed, we can think much, much bigger than we've been able to for the past 8 years, maybe for the past 40 or 50 years. Let's never forget that it will be concerted citizen action applied on a government we create, but we can achieve a progressive, green, fair, and just shock doctrine. Now, I want to introduce a special guest here before we present the 2 awards. I want to say that it gives us all great pleasure to be joined by several members of the Letelier and Moffitt families. A cousin of Ronnie Carpin-Moffitt, Sherry Weiss, is with us, and 4 members of the Letelier family, Isabel, her sons Christian and Francisco, and Orlando's nephew, Rodrigo Leyva. On behalf of that family whose sacrifice and remarkable work are intertwined with the rich 45-year history of IPS and with these awards, I invite the artist and poet Francisco Letelier to come forward and say a few words on behalf of his family, and I ask Sherry, Isabel, Christian, and Rodrigo to rise as we thank them.
Good evening. Many of you may be happy to know that I have not prepared a poem to read to you this evening. However, it feels very poetic and just to be here this year. You know, my family, we're not able to be here every year. Sometimes there's one member of the family, sometimes there's none. Rarely do a few of us get the opportunity, things come together so that we can all join with you for the awards. It is remarkable to me, since I don't live in Washington, D.C., to come back here once in a while and to understand what a powerful thing the Human Rights Awards have become. They have grown much larger than the legacy of one man or one nation. As you look over the awardees of the past few years and then go back 32 years, you realize that every time an award has been made, it has been made at now with the 2020 hindsight of history at a moment that was very important for those struggles, for those people. And they really become a reading of history, of the history that we need to share more and more. And it's that history, that understanding of those struggles, the awardees of the last 32 years, that can help us do exactly what John was suggesting we do, that we continue to build the networks and coalitions that will help us to continue to imagine the future that we want. Many of you know that my father served as Chile's ambassador from 1970 to 73 for the Allende government. And I'm very pleased to recognize some of the diplomats that are present with us here this evening. And please hold your applause until I get through with them, because they do deserve enormous applause. I want to say that it's unfortunate that the Bolivian and Venezuelan ambassadors are not able to be here this year for reasons you're probably aware of. But we're happy to have the current heads of those two embassies here tonight. Angelo Rivero Santos from Venezuela, and from Bolivia, Enrica Dueñas. From the Cuban interest section, we have Embajador Jorge Bolaños, and from the South African embassy, we have Tyrone Gunny, Tobogo Kola, and Nadira Bayat. Representing the Chilean embassy, we have Paola Palma and Rodrigo Mesa. And finally, I want to extend a very warm welcome to one ambassador who's actually the son of a former Letelier-Moffitt Award recipient. In 1981, the international award went to a very brave Argentine journalist named Jacobo Timmerman, who never stopped fighting the human rights abuses in his country, even after he had been imprisoned and tortured. Today, his son is the ambassador to the United States from Argentina, so please join me in welcoming Embajador Héctor Timmerman. On behalf of my family and extended family, we welcome you and thank you for being here. So let's continue with this beautiful evening.
Now, on to the awards and to our first presenter. How often does a leader of our own human rights community have the courage to leave a job and take to the streets to run for Congress? May Donna Edwards be an inspiration to a new generation of public servants that we will need to create the better world that we all know is possible. A military daughter, a public interest lawyer, a mother, a nonprofit director, Donna's perseverance helped pass the Violence Against Women Act of 1994, providing comprehensive funding to shelter and services for victims of domestic abuse and their children. She will help us end the war in Iraq, and she will help us build an economy that serves people and the planet. So please welcome the representative of the 4th District of Maryland, Donna Edwards, to present the Letelier-Moffitt Award to the outstanding group.
Thank you. Thank you, and good evening. I'm really honored to be able to present the award tonight. I've attended these awards for many years, but never as a member of Congress, and so I'm really grateful to be here this evening. Now, many of you may know, but tomorrow marks a really important date in history, October 16th, 1998. It was exactly 10 years ago that the Chilean general Augusto Pinochet was arrested in London. And many of you may remember where you were, and I remember where I was at the ARCA Foundation, because it was through the work of the ARCA Foundation and many others supporting tremendous efforts of human rights advocates that helped make that happen. And so I'm just grateful to be here at this awards ceremony, because we, fast forward into history, and the award that I'm distinctly honored to present tonight goes to another brilliant set of human rights fighters who've been fighting for 25 years for human rights and justice. And so we know that in this country, our own George Bush and Vice President Cheney, it's a struggle to get those things out, but are among those who've authorized and planned this administration's brutal efforts around the world that have, I believe, in effect, endorsed and pushed this nation into engaging in torture and rendition. And it leaves us to wonder at this important moment who will be standing up for human rights. And I think that we can hopefully safely say that come January 2009, we will have leadership in this country that once again embraces a concept of being part of the international community and standing with our sisters and brothers around the world fighting for human rights. And I know I'll be working toward that effort. So this evening we have the great pleasure of being able to present a very special international award to Asociacion Pro Derechos Humanos, which has been working for 25 years in the fight to defend human rights. And in an effort, some of us know their efforts just more recently as they work to bring Alberto Fujimori to justice in Peru. From 1990 to 2000, that government and that leader lorded over Peru, committing atrocities in the name of fighting terrorism. How familiar does that sound? And after the corruption of his regime was exposed, he fled to Japan and lived in exile for 5 years before attempting to return to power, using Chile as a base. And fortunately, as Chile has moved forward, that couldn't happen. And it really is a testament to how far that country and that government under its new leadership has come, that the Chilean Supreme Court voted to extradite Fujimori to Peru to stand trial for kidnapping, as well as 2 massacres in which 25 civilians were executed. And it's quite an irony and a twist of events that Orlando Letelier's son, Juan Pablo, now a Chilean senator, was a leading supporter of this extradition. Mom. But the true driving force behind this historic trial is really the recipient this evening. And so I want to pay special tribute to APRODEH that first led the campaign for the extradition, and particularly to one of their attorneys who's here with us this evening, Gloria Cano. Would you stand so that everyone can recognize you? Thank you. Thank you. She was a leading lawyer in representing victims in this case, and just recently, APRODEH also won convictions of several former death squad leaders. And I think, what we have here is a testament to just good old-fashioned advocacy and organizing and the strong fight that it takes to bring people to justice. And so here, 25 years after it was founded by Francisco Soberon, who will be accepting the award on behalf of APRODEH, this is an organization that really is a model of what a human rights organization can be and should be. And they are known for their sensitive embrace of the families of victims whose cases they've championed, and known for the unique understanding that sometimes human rights work demonstrates in the streets and around a country, and indeed around a world, to raise the profile of their cause. And so it gives me such tremendous pleasure to be here with IPS and among friends to present this award not only for your work on the Fujimori trial, but really for your 25 years of work and leadership to investigate, to report, and to tell the story of human rights crimes in your country and to the rest of the world. You're an inspiration to us. I'm inspired by you, and I know that the world is. And so it is my great honor now to present the 2008 International Letelier-Moffitt Human Rights Award to APRODEH and its founder, Francisco Soberon, and attorney Gloria Cano.
Representative Donna Edwards, dear friends and colleagues of the Institute for Policy Studies, dear family of Orlando Letelier, Doña Isabel, Francisco, Christian. I've been last night with Christian, Jacqueline in a venue, a cultural venue, wonderful. And I'm very honored to be here tonight with Gloria by my side, and in name of APRODEH, say a few words to you, thanking for this honor we received tonight in this, our 25th anniversary. It's true that when we start our work, we start to learning how to do activism in human rights. It wouldn't be impossible to achieve what we have now achieved if we do not have the support of dozens of Peruvian colleagues in our organization and in another organization of human rights in Peru. In 1985, we founded also the National Coordination for Human Rights, an umbrella organization of all the Peruvian human rights movement in Peru. And from there on, the struggle continued. Continue in a defensive strategic during the almost 20 years of political violence, in a crossfire between the Shining Path, MRTA, and the armed forces, the security forces. And human rights abuses and crimes against humanity was a common situation in my country. I think that also in this night, I might express my recognition to victims and relatives of victims, because with their support was possible for us to continue to work on behalf of them. Donna has mentioned the two cases that has allowed us to bring Fujimori to trial, the Barros Altos and the Cantuta case. In this circumstance, I want to mention particularly the families of La Cantuta, because with them we have built 16 years of close relations, going to Tokyo, going to Santiago, mobilizing all over the country to achieve what is now probably in December, we're going to know the final conviction to Fujimori. So in these 25 years, a lot of things have happened in Peru. Are not perfect yet. I think we have to continue struggling against impunity. There are obstacles that we have to confront nowadays. But I think with the important support we have received also in these 25 years of the international community, of the international human rights organizations. And I want to mention some of them, especially being in DC. In the early 80s when we started our work, in those days, America's Watch was the name, started their work visiting Peru. And then a few years later, with WOLA, we start a link of work that continues till now. And several other organizations here in DC and in the States have been supporting our activities. I will mention SEHIL that started their activities in 1990 and that also gave us important support to bring litigation to the inter-American system. And also Amnesty International in general, and also the section of United States Center for Justice Accountability recently, because APRODEH, I think, has learned to use all forms of struggle, nationally, internationally, inter-American system. Recently, we have support Center for Justice Accountability to bring two perpetrators through civil suits for reparations to victims in a Jomarca case in Miami, and there's pending some cases here in Maryland. So this is something that we have learned from all these colleagues from international organizations based here in DC or in other cities in the United States and all over the world. In France with the International Federation of Human Rights, in Geneva with the International Commission of Jurists, and several others. And in Latin America with dozens of organizations of human rights all over the region. I think we are proud of having in Latin America an extended network of human rights organizations in all of our countries, in Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, Brazil, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, and others. So I think this is something that we should be proud, not only being members of APRODEH or being members of the National Coordination for Human Rights in Peru, but being members of a Latin American community of human rights and of a world community of human rights. Because always we have to look not only in what is happening in our countries, we have to look abroad our countries, not only in our neighbor countries, but also further on. I think that also that's what impels us also to be involved with the International Criminal Court process, with the coalition of International Criminal Court, one of the biggest coalitions in the world promoting the ICC. So I think that the future is of hope, the future is of peace, the future is of justice. And our commitment will continue in that perspective. So I would like to thank all the members of the committee who has honored to select us for this award. And I would like finally to make a special mention for a particular circumstance. In Peru nowadays, they are ending, after 60 years of work, one religious congregation, the Merinol brothers, priests and sisters. And they are, because a conservative bishop in the Diocese of Julie has canceled their relation with them. And we have been working for them in these 25 years in that regions of the highlands of Peru. So for them, I want to express my solidarity for what they have done in these 60 years. And we know that not necessarily in the country, but from other places in the world, they are playing the same role that they played in Peru. So thank you very much for all, and thank you for being here this evening.
Thank you, Donna and Gloria and Francisco. Now, before we turn to our second award, we have a special treat as an introduction to our domestic awardee. To pay tribute to the Indian Workers' Congress, who you'll hear more about in a moment, we've invited the classical Indian dance group Nrityanjali, under the guidance of artistic director Meena Telakachurla, to perform a dance from Indian mythology. And I'm going to invite Meena up for a moment to tell you about the group, and then we'll take this podium away and we'll get a taste of their work.
Very good evening, ladies and gentlemen. From the temples of southern India, an art as old as 2,000 years, which was a form of worship, we present to you the classical Indian dance, Bharatanatyam. This dance that we are performing today for you is known as Tillana, which is a rich combination of intricately calculated footwork, graceful movements of the body, eyes, and the limbs, and poses that look like the temple sculptures. We are now presenting Tillana by the Nrityanjali Dance Ensemble. Thank you.
Nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridridani dani samdritani tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim nadridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridani dani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tum tanana daradim tanana nadridani dani samdritani nadridani tum samdritani tanana daradim tanana nadridani samdritani tum tum nadridani tum samdritani tanana daradim tanana nadridani samdritani tum nadridani tum samdritani tanana daradim tanana nadridani samdritani tum nadridani tum samdritani tanana daradim tanana daradim tanana daradim.
Institutions flourish when they're well governed. And as our second and final presenter, I'm pleased to call upon IPS board member Barbara Ehrenreich, who's joined here tonight by fellow IPS board members. And this is a great lineup: Ethelbert Miller, Andy Shalal, Harriet Barlow, Bob Borisage, Lisa Fuentes, Daphne Weisham, Clarence Lusain, Sissy Farenthold, Elsbeth Bothy, Nancy Lewis, and Mark Raskin. Can you imagine where we would be if this were the board of Goldman Sachs? In terms of an issue we work on at IPS, this group is very good at reining in CEO pay. Now back to Barbara. When Barbara Ehrenreich writes, people act. Her nickel and dime showed millions how people cannot live in dignity on the minimum wage. Her newest book, This Land is Their Land, lays out the equality agenda for the new paradigm. When members of the Indian Workers' Congress, who you're about to meet, ended a hunger strike and moved their protest to the Department of Justice this summer, she came out and added her voice.
You helped bring to light the scandal of slavery, which is not an isolated thing. We in this country had a war to end slavery about 150 years ago. Well, maybe we need another one, because that didn't work.
Please welcome Barbara Ehrenreich to present the Letelier-Moffitt Domestic Award.
Thank you, although it's a little unfair because the standards for entertainment here have just been raised way too high for me. Anyway, this is exciting. This is a great honor. And I have to admit, I take a somewhat morbid interest in stories of the abuse of workers by their employers. Walmart workers forced to work overtime without pay, sometimes locked into stores. Target employees held hostage by their bosses for hours of forced interrogation. Immigrant workers in Los Angeles, who I met last summer, who are paid about $3.50 an hour for washing cars. But even with all of this kind of background, I had trouble believing the story of the Indian Workers' Congress and what these workers had been through. In 2006, a recruiting company in India promised 550 Indian workers that they would receive permanent jobs if they came to this country, came to the United States. They would get jobs rebuilding shipyards on the Gulf Coast, that they would get green cards, and that they would be able to bring their families over here too eventually. They had little catch. They had to pay $20,000 to this company to get these things, which, you know, that's a lot of money for anybody, but that's a lot of money, I think, in southern India. Some of them borrowed money, others sold their homes, but when they came to this country, they found that they hadn't been recruited. They'd been trafficked into a state resembling that of slavery. They were forced to work in hazardous conditions, forced to live on company property. They had to pay over $1,000 a month to live in a kind of dormitory room with 23 other men, and paid wages that were a lot less than anything they were promised, with, of course, the threat of deportation hanging over them if they protested in any way. When they began to organize a protest, armed guards attacked their living quarters and detained 6 men. And I want to say to the members of the Indian Workers' Congress who are here tonight to accept the award, that for me personally, as an American, the way you were treated by this country is a source of real shame. I am embarrassed at what you found here. But the story, fortunately, doesn't end with their abuse. On March of this year, after having reported themselves to the Department of Justice, a lot of luck there, as victims of trafficking and demanding federal prosecution of the company Signal International that employed them in Mississippi, nearly 100 of these workers walked off their jobs in Mississippi, leaving their hard hats at the gate. Then they launched a, quote, journey of justice, as they called it, walking all the way from New Orleans to Washington, D.C. Now, this part I didn't think I fully understood just by reading it. So I cornered the people who were here to accept the award tonight during the reception, and I said, let's get this straight. You walked from New Orleans to the District of Columbia. Yep, they did. And then, after they'd been here for a few weeks, they began a fast, a hunger strike, well, not a strike, but a fast to protest the injustices they'd experienced. So, just think of that. Walking, then fasting. They fasted for 29 days to demand justice and an end to human trafficking. Now, along the way, they attracted the support of a number of groups, more than I have time to mention here, including especially Jobs with Justice, the National Immigration Law Center, the Asia-Pacific American Labor Alliance, the AFL-CIO, and a number of church and synagogue-based groups. We have learned through this case, if we hadn't learned it before, we certainly learned it through the actions and the struggle of the India Workers' Congress, is an important lesson of globalization. And I think we're coming to understand it more, is that mistreatment of any worker, of any national origins or any, background or color, is a threat to workers everywhere. And to the members of the IWC, the India Workers' Congress who are here tonight, I want to say thank you to you. And you can come up, actually you can start coming up now, I guess. First, I thank you for coming here to work in this country to help rebuild in the wake of Hurricane Katrina. And secondly, for giving us such an amazing example of courage and, I would add, physical endurance.
My name is Abby.
ഈ അവാർഡ് കിട്ടിയതിൽ വളരെയധികം സന്തോഷമുണ്ട്, നന്ദി പറയുന്നു.
We are very grateful and thankful for this award that you've given us.
ഈ അവാർഡ് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഞങ്ങൾക്ക് തരാൻ സെലക്ട് ചെയ്ത കമ്മിറ്റിയെയും അതിന്റെ ഓർഗനൈസേഷനെയും പ്രത്യേകം ഞങ്ങൾ അഭിനന്ദിക്കുന്നു.
We especially appreciate and thank the organizers and the selection committee that gave us this award.
അതേപോലെ തന്നെ ഞങ്ങളുടെ സത്യാഗ്രഹ യാത്രയിലും നിരാഹാര സമരത്തിലും ഞങ്ങളെ സപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യുകയും സഹായിക്കുകയും ചെയ്ത എല്ലാ വ്യക്തികളോടും സംഘടനകളോടുമുള്ള നന്ദി പ്രത്യേകം ഇപ്പോൾ അറിയിച്ചുകൊള്ളുന്നു.
And I'm especially extending my thanks to the individuals and the organizations that supported us during our Satyagraha journey and in our hunger strike.
ഹുറിക്കെയിൻ കത്രീനയ്ക്ക് ശേഷം പല രാജ്യങ്ങളിൽ നിന്നായിട്ട് വളരെയധികം വർക്കേഴ്സിനെ ചീപ്പ് ലേബർ സിസ്റ്റത്തിൽ ഈ രാജ്യത്തിൽ കൊണ്ടുവരാൻ ഇടയുണ്ടായി.
After Hurricane Katrina, this country imported many cheap labor systems and workers from other countries.
ആ കൂട്ടത്തിലാണ് ഏകദേശം ഒരു 550ഓളം ഇന്ത്യക്കാരെ ദുബൈയിൽ നിന്നും ഇന്ത്യയിൽ നിന്നും ഒരേ സമയം റിക്രൂട്ട് ചെയ്ത് ഇവിടെ എത്തിച്ചത്.
It was in that group that they recruited about 550 Indian workers from India and Dubai to come here.
ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ വരുന്നതിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് $20,000 കൊടുത്തിട്ടാണ് ഞാൻ ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് വന്നത്.
I personally gave about $20,000 to come into this country.
എൻ്റെ ഫാദർ 20 വർഷം ഇന്ത്യൻ മിലിറ്ററിയിൽ ജോലി ചെയ്തിട്ട് നേടിയ സമ്പാദ്യങ്ങളും വീടും വിറ്റിട്ടാണ് ഞാൻ ഇവിടെ വന്നത്.
My father worked in the Indian military for 20 years, and it was through selling our home and land that 20 years of his labor cost that I was able to come here.
ഇന്ന് എൻ്റെ അപ്പനും അമ്മയും എൻ്റെ ഭാര്യയും ഞാൻ കാണാത്ത കുഞ്ഞും ജീവിക്കുന്ന ഒരു വാടക വീട്ടിലാണ്.
Right now, my mother, my father, my wife, and the son I've never seen live in a rental home.
എന്തുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ ഈ പണം കൊടുത്തെന്ന് ചോദിച്ചു കഴിഞ്ഞാൽ എനിക്ക് തോന്നി ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് വന്നതിന് ശേഷം എനിക്ക് എൻ്റെ മാതാപിതാക്കളെ സംരക്ഷിക്കാനും എൻ്റെ കുടുംബത്തോടൊപ്പം താമസിക്കാനും വിചാരിച്ചിട്ടാണ് ഞാൻ ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് വന്നത്.
If you ask me why did you give this money, I will say because I thought I was saving my parents and I would be able to live with my family here.
പക്ഷേ ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് വന്നതിന് ശേഷം വളരെ ഇവിടെ വന്നതിന് ശേഷം ഒരു അടിമയെ പോലെ ജീവിക്കേണ്ടതാണ് എനിക്കുണ്ടായ അവസ്ഥ.
But the experience I had after coming here was living like a slave.
അവർ ഇന്ത്യ വെച്ച് പറഞ്ഞിരുന്ന എല്ലാ വാഗ്ദാനങ്ങളും പൊള്ളയായിരുന്നെന്ന് ഇവിടെ വന്നതിന് ശേഷമാണ് എനിക്ക് മനസ്സിലാക്കാൻ സാധിച്ചത്.
It was only after coming here that I realized, along with everyone else, that the promises they gave us were all deceptive.
പലരും എൻ്റെ അടുത്ത് ചോദിക്കുകയുണ്ടായി, നിങ്ങൾ ഇത്രയേറെ ധൈര്യത്തോടു കൂടിയിട്ട് എങ്ങനെ ഒരു യൂണിറ്റി ആയിട്ട് മുന്നോട്ട് പോയെന്ന്.
Many people have asked us, how are all of you able to work together with such unity and with such courage?
അതിനകത്തൊരു സത്യമുണ്ട്, അത് നിങ്ങൾക്കെല്ലാവർക്കും അറിയാവുമെന്ന് എനിക്കറിയത്തില്ല. ഭൂമിയിലെല്ലാം നഷ്ടപ്പെട്ട ഒരുത്തന് പിന്നെ ഒന്നിനും പേടിക്കേണ്ട കാര്യമില്ല.
There is a truth in that I don't know if many of you understand. For a man who's lost everything in the world, there's nothing else to fear.
ഈ ധൈര്യമാണ് ഞങ്ങളെല്ലാവരും ഈ സമരങ്ങൾക്കും നിരാകാര സത്യാഗ്രഹത്തിനും വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് അറിഞ്ഞിട്ടും കേട്ടിട്ടില്ലാത്ത ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് വന്ന് വെച്ച് പ്രേരിപ്പിച്ചത്.
It was that belief that pushed us, who we didn't know each other, to work together to gain this and through these strikes.
ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് വന്നതിന് ശേഷം ചെറിയ ഒരു റൂമിനകത്ത് ഞങ്ങളെ 24 പേരെ കുത്തി നിറച്ചിടുകയും ഞങ്ങളോട് വളരെ മൃഗീയമായിട്ട് ആ കമ്പനി പെരുമാറുകയും ചെയ്തപ്പോൾ ഞങ്ങൾ ഇതിനെതിരെ ശബ്ദമുയർത്തി.
It was in this country that we were brought here, and we lived 24 people to a very small room, and they treated us like animals.
അപ്പോൾ ഞങ്ങളിൽ കുറെ ആൾക്കാരെ മണിക്കൂറുകളോളം ഒരു റൂമിനുള്ളിൽ ലോക്ക് ചെയ്തിടുകയും അവരെ ഭീഷണിപ്പെടുത്തുകയും ബലം പ്രയോഗിച്ച് ഡീപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യാനും കമ്പനിയും അതിന്റെ ഗാർഡുകളുടെ കൂടി ശ്രമിച്ചു.
And when we tried to speak against it, the company and armed guards came and locked a few of us into a room and tried to forcefully deport us back to our country.
അവർ ഞങ്ങളോട് പറഞ്ഞു, ഇത് നിന്റെ ഇന്ത്യയല്ല, ഇത് യുണൈറ്റഡ് സ്റ്റേറ്റ്സ് ആണ്, നിനക്ക് ഈ രാജ്യത്ത് ജീവിക്കണമെങ്കിൽ നിന്റെ വായടച്ച് മിണ്ടാതിരിക്കണമെന്ന് പറഞ്ഞു.
They told us, this is not your India, this is the United States, and if you want to live here, you have to sit down and shut up.
പക്ഷേ ഞങ്ങൾ അവരുടെ ആ ശാസനയെ അംഗീകരിക്കാൻ മനസ്സ് വെച്ചില്ല. ഞങ്ങളെല്ലാവരും ഒറ്റക്കെട്ടായിട്ട് കമ്പനിയിൽ നിന്ന് വോക്കൌട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ തീരുമാനിക്കുകയും വോക്കൌട്ട് ചെയ്യുകയും ചെയ്തു.
But instead of bowing down to those rebukes and chastisement, we decided to stand unified and walk out of the company.
ഞങ്ങൾ ന്യൂയോർക്കിൽ നിന്നും വാഷിംഗ്ടൺ വരെ ഒരു സമരയാത്ര നടത്തുകയും വാഷിംഗ്ടണിൽ വന്ന് നിരാഹാരം കിടക്കുകയും ചെയ്തു.
We from New Orleans walked to Washington D.C. and did a protest there, and then sat on a hunger strike in Washington D.C.
വാഷിംഗ്ടൺ ഡിസിയിൽ വൈറ്റ് ഹൗസിന്റെ ഫ്രണ്ടിലും ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ് ഓഫ് ജസ്റ്റിസിന്റെ മുന്നിലും ഞങ്ങൾ ആഴ്ചകളോളം നിരാഹാരം കിടന്നു.
We spent weeks in Washington in front of the Department of Justice and in front of the White House.
അതിനെല്ലാം ശേഷം ഞങ്ങൾ 4 പേരെ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ് ഓഫ് ജസ്റ്റിസ് തെരഞ്ഞെടുത്ത് നാളെ ഇന്റർവ്യൂവിന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട് ക്ഷണിച്ചിരിക്കുകയാണ്.
Now, after all of that, several months ago, they have finally called 4 people to be interviewed at the Department of Justice tomorrow.
ആ സമയത്ത് ഞങ്ങൾ ഡിപ്പാർട്ട്മെന്റ് ഓഫ് ജസ്റ്റിസിൽ ഒരു കാര്യം ആവശ്യപ്പെട്ടു, അവരുടെ പ്രൊട്ടക്ഷന് വേണ്ടിയിട്ട്. അപ്പോൾ അവർ അത് നിരസിക്കുകയും അവരെ ഡീപ്പോർട്ട് ചെയ്യാൻ സാധിക്കുമെന്നാണ് അവർ പറഞ്ഞിരിക്കുന്നത്.
At that time, we asked the Department of Justice for the protection of those workers that are going for the interview tomorrow. And instead, the Department of Justice has refused to guarantee their safety and security, and there is a possibility that they may be deported.
അവർ നാളെ ഇന്റർവ്യൂവിന് വേണ്ടി പോകാനിരിക്കുകയാണ്. വളരെയേറെ മനപ്രയാസത്തോടും വളരെയേറെ ദുഃഖത്തോടും കൂടിയിട്ട് ആ 4 പേരെ വിട്ടിട്ടാണ് ഞാൻ ഈ അവാർഡ് വാങ്ങാൻ വന്നത്.
I left them there under great sorrow and distress tonight to come here to receive this award on their behalf.
എനിക്ക് വേറൊരു കാര്യം പറയാനുള്ളത്, ഇന്ന് ലോകത്തിൽ ലേബർ നിയമങ്ങൾ വളരെയുണ്ട് ലേബേഴ്സിനെ സംരക്ഷിക്കുവാനായിട്ട്. ഈ നിയമങ്ങളെല്ലാം നിലനിൽക്കുന്ന സമയത്ത് ഇതേപോലെയുള്ള സമൂഹത്തിലെ അനീതികൾ തുടച്ചു മാറ്റാൻ നിങ്ങളുടെ എല്ലാവരുടെയും സഹായവും സഹകരണവും ഇനി ആവശ്യമുണ്ട്.
What I can tell you is that while there are laws to protect workers in this country and around the world, there is still a need for all of your support to change the injustices and the detestable acts that are perpetrated against workers even today.
അതുപോലെ തന്നെ നാളെ പോകുന്ന ആ 4 പേർക്കും നിങ്ങളുടെ എല്ലാവരുടെയും സഹായവും നിങ്ങളുടെ എല്ലാ സപ്പോർട്ടും ആവശ്യമാണ്.
The 4 workers tomorrow need all of your help and your support and your solidarity.
ഇന്ന് രാത്രിയിൽ ഞാൻ നിങ്ങളോട് അഭ്യർത്ഥിക്കുകയാണ്, നമുക്കെല്ലാം ഒന്നിച്ചു നിന്നുകൊണ്ട് സമൂഹത്തിൽ നടക്കുന്ന ഈ രീതിയിലുള്ള അനാചാരങ്ങളെ അല്ലെ അനീതികളെ നമുക്ക് തുടച്ചു മാറ്റാനായിട്ട് ഒറ്റക്കെട്ടായിട്ട് പ്രവർത്തിക്കണം. നമുക്കെല്ലാം അതിന് കൈ ഓർത്ത് നിൽക്കാം എന്ന് പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് ഞാൻ എൻ്റെ വാക്കുകളെ ഉപസംഹരിക്കുന്നു.
I'm concluding my words by saying that I hope that we could all join hands and to work against the injustices and wipe them off the face of this country that have been perpetrated against workers and human beings in the United States.
Thank you.
There's another special person we wanted to mention tonight, which is that the Letelier-Moffitt Selection Committee has asked that we take a moment tonight to pay tribute to the man who has never let us forget that health care is a right, Senator Edward Kennedy. A man who has stood at this IPS podium twice to present Letelier-Moffitt Human Rights Awards over these years, these 32 years. Senator Kennedy, like our colleague at IPS Saul Landau, was recently granted the highest award bestowed to a civilian by the government of Chile, the Order of the Merit of Chile Award, for his decades-long commitment to the struggle for human rights and democracy in that country. Many of you will remember that following the 1973 coup against the democratically elected government of Salvador Allende in Chile, Senator Kennedy worked tirelessly on behalf of the tortured and the disappeared. And in 1974, Kennedy led the fight in Congress, and this is a reminder of what Congress can do. He led the fight to cut off military aid to the Pinochet regime, a fight that he was successful in winning. His speech on the Senate floor that day, the day that Orlando and Ronnie were killed, is reprinted at the beginning of your program. We wish you were here, Senator Kennedy, but we are all wishing you well. I also want to pay tribute to someone. We have a school, as many of you know, for activists at IPS, the Social Action and Leadership School for Activists, or SALSA, run by Netfa Freeman. And each year at this time, we give an award for outstanding teacher. And so I simply want to recognize an incredible teacher, taught me a lot about fundraising, Beth Grupp, and ask Beth to stand up. There are also 3 names that I heard from different of you. I've heard different of you mention in the reception tonight. People who've guided us in our work, who were dear friends of many of us, and who've died in the past year, and who we miss dearly on this evening. And let me just mention their names: Michael Maggio, Stuart Mott, and Paul Newman. You honor them, we all, by carrying on the fight for human rights, for peace, and for justice. And as we close, I want to ask you to join me in thanking my dear colleagues at the Institute for Policy Studies who made this evening possible, a team led by the ever-calm, super-competent Sena Chikata. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Thank you all.